Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, a lot of very interesting geolocations, so let's start. And today we're gonna start with Kopin Direction. When talking about this territory, the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have few interesting geolocations, and the first one is coming from Sinkovka. Not geolocation, but important note from the ground. According to the Russian sources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in the northern part of the village and to enter the next two streets that located below the main foothold on the north. So according to some Russians, this is the current offensive progress of the Russian forces. So let's adjust the map just for this video according to information we have, and you need to understand one important thing about Sinkovka. We used to measure the progress based on the cities and so on. And the thing is that the Russians are not planning to capture the entire Sinkovka because it's too difficult. For example, I don't expect from my side this attack from the Russian side somewhere between the forest and so on, because there is a very important and one of the most powerful strongholds of the Ukrainian forces in this area, and I'm talking about this forest. So obviously the Russians are not planning to storm this forest or something like this, because they will waste lots of time. But the main purpose for the Russians for this stage of special military operation is to capture a few more streets to the south and to establish control over this territory. And if the Russians are able to do this, and obviously they are planning to do this very soon, then the Russians will be able to get the operational space. I'm talking about this line. And after this line, the Russians have a significant number of opportunities and possibilities to attack in different directions. They can attack bypass the forest from the east. The Russians can attack along the main road in direction of Petropavlovka, and of course the Russians will attack the Ukrainians in direction of let's say Pershatravneva. So this is the, let's say, Russian town, but under Russian control, but they can move in this direction as well. So the main purpose of Sinkovka is to get operational space, but not to dig in this battle for months and so on. Also, another interesting update is coming from Kopin Direction. I'm talking about Odaya. Have you mentioned that I stopped publishing any updates about this soldier, this operator, because the last update we got on the date 36. So the last update we received 2 days ago. We haven't received anything yesterday, and we haven't received anything today. So there are lots of things that might happen to this Udai diary and this Udai FPV drone operator. He might be killed because he became too popular, and we know that for the 36 days he managed to the loss of the Ukrainian forces he made were more than 200, so more than half a battalion. Maybe he was hunted by the Ukrainians, I don't know. The only thing we got that yesterday in the morning, the Ukrainian sources, the Russian sources who connected with this Udai operator told us that Udai went for hunting and he still hasn't returned. So let's wait what is going to be next. Maybe he will return, but maybe not. Now we are moving to Liman area, where we have some updates as well, and the most important one is coming from the cities. The first one we got update from the city by the name of KICHA. It's located on the southern part of Kupinsk area. According to the Russians, according to the Russian intelligence, the Ukrainians start mining buildings. Yes, they start mining buildings. They are starting doing the same thing as we saw in Bakhmut, as we saw in Marinka, as we saw in let's say in many towns that the Russians were storming. The Ukrainians start mining buildings, and this is a very important thing, because as I understand, the Ukrainians are planning to withdraw their positions, and they're not going to repeat the same mistake they made in Bakhmut when they left significant number of high-rise building for the Russian control. Now the Ukrainians are not going to do the same. They will destroy everything they leave. And now let's move to Liman direction. And today, as a result, we got finally some confirmation of Russian progress from this territory. If you remember, during the previous days, we were talking a lot about these three lines that we haven't received any geolocated confirmation of Russian progress. And most of the mappers have updated the map based on nothing and so on. And today, the Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians, just paying your attention, published the video of another Russian offensive operation in this direction. On this video, we can see another Russian armored fist, two tanks. They were protecting and trying to support significant number of personnel armored carriers, and at the end of the convoy there was another tank. And using these 5 armored vehicles, the Russians were storming the Ukrainian positions. And we understand that the video was published by the Ukrainian side, so mainly we'll see the FPV drone strikes, the losses among the Russians, the Ukrainian success, and so on. But the most important from these videos is the geolocation, where exactly this video and these attacks of FPV drones took place. And if we return back to the map, all these FPV drone strikes took place in this area, somewhere in this area, which confirms the Russian progress, obviously. And now we have the right to update the map and to show at least this progress and this territory under Russian control. We haven't received more updates. We haven't received nothing from these fields, but obviously we're going to receive some in the very near future. We also got the video from the Ukrainian side. Also, this video was published from the Russian side, but about the Ukrainian positions in this area. For example, on this footage, on these scenes, we can see the rotation or evacuation process from the Ukrainian side. We see how the Ukrainian personal carrier arrived at Ukrainian positions, and the Ukrainians were planning to make rotation, but something went wrong, and right exactly during the rotation process, the Russians attacked this territory with artillery, and basically they ruined and broke the entire process, and a lot of Ukrainians were killed and wounded. Of course, they continued, but if at the beginning the Ukrainians were planning to evacuate maybe 2 or 3 soldiers, now they were forced to evacuate entire point. So in this video, the entire platoon was destroyed as a result of artillery strike. Lots of were wounded, lots of survived, but lots of Ukrainians took a decision to leave this territory, and basically armored vehicle left this position. I can't tell you whether the Russians after that strike entered this territory or not, but this is the geolocation we have about the edge Ukrainian position on this area. So we have the edge Russian positions and we have edge Ukraine positions, and currently this is more or less the approximate geolocated situation on Liman front line. We see that the Russians continue offensive operation. We see that the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to stop the Russian tanks with artillery, and the Ukrainians, there were a lot of tanks, and the best solution to attack the tanks was to use anti-tank missiles, but the Ukrainians were trying to stop the Russians with FPV drones, Russian armored vehicles. Maybe sometimes this solution works, but as I understand, according to this video, that solution didn't work. Now we're moving to Sestrodar Direction. We haven't received anything from this area after the Russians advanced in the vicinity in the area of the villages like Sporne, in direction of the village by the name of Ivano-Darivka, along the railways to the north in direction of Vyemka. The Russians completely stopped and stopped moving any activity. Maybe there are clashes, maybe there are very heavy clashes on this direction, but we haven't received anything. So for now, I can't tell you whether there were any success or any progress from the Russian side. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomov's direction, and we have a significant number of updates. Mainly, most of them are like messages in Telegram channels and Twitter and so on. First of all, let's talk about the northern part. There are a lot of updates. Let's go step by step. According to information we have, the Russians launched an offensive operation in the direction of Grigorovka. According to some Russian sources, the Russians attacked and managed even to establish control over a few buildings and the edge position of the city. Other sources later reported that the Russians haven't entered Grigorovka, but the main purpose was to move along this tree line, but at some certain point, and after that, some Russian forces started moving along this tree line to the south. Now, this is more or less smart decision from the Russian side, because as we discussed, there is a strategical hill in this area, and I'm talking about this territory, the main stronghold of the Ukrainians on Bogdanovka-Grigorovka direction. Without taking control over this territory, there are less chances for the Russians to complete the battle for Bogdanovka and Chasov Yar and let's say Kanal Ivanovsky successfully. They're going to pay a significant price. They need to capture 2 or 3 strategical hills and everything will go smooth. So the Russians started moving, and we understand that the main purpose of the Russians is to get as close as far as possible to the south in direction of Kalinovka, and if it's possible to establish control over this territory. And this will allow the Russians to cut the main supply that Ukrainians use, supply road from Kalinovka to this fortification hill. So if the Russians cut, then they maybe 2 or 3 days and Ukrainians will be forced to step back because of risk of being encircled by the Russian forces. But for now, the clash still continues. Furthermore, we know that according to some mappers, without any geolocations, the Russians have established control and have some progress on this hill of Bogdanovka as well. So for now, if this information is correct and true, we know that currently the Russians have few directions of attack. They can attack the hill along this line. They can attack the hill along Grigorovka line, and of course they can attack this hill from the main line. So I expect within the next 24 hours the renewals of clashes in this area, and the Russians will try to establish complete control over this territory. Furthermore, other sources reported that the Russians have already penetrated the Ukrainian defense belt in the village itself, and currently 50% of this territory of this village is under complete Russian control. We don't have any proof, so for now we're going to keep as is. If you remember, during the previous video I've reported that Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation in the direction of Khromovo, and by the evening we got more details about that attack. So that was just a regular reconnaissance in force, or just a sending of sabotage groups. The Russians managed to discover the groups, and the Ukrainians basically were defeated somewhere among the fields and were forced to step back. So no changes on this territory. About Ivanovska, we have just a very interesting video. Maybe we can consider this video as the beginning of Russian storm operation. On this scenes we can see how the Russians using drones managed to discover the small base or temporary point of concentration of Ukrainian forces, and the Russians with FPV drones destroyed significant number of light armed vehicles. Of course, it's not tanks, it's nothing, but you know that sometimes light vehicles are more important than even tanks, because light vehicles can allow you to be flexible, mobile, can allow you to evacuate soldiers. So we see that the Russians have some certain focus in this area. Maybe this is the beginning of the storm. Another interesting video is coming from Chasov Yar. Let's take a look at this one. On this video we see how the Russians were continued their reconnaissance operation against Ukrainian FPV drones. You know that at the beginning of the special military operation, either the Russians and the Ukrainians were using the drones just like as the strike forces to attack this or that unit and so on. Later the Russians start using FPV drone bombardments, so they took a decision not to waste the drones but to use grenades and to use like one drone for many times. And the next level of drone warfare is the creation of reconnaissance teams. And the main purpose of reconnaissance teams is to discover the position of enemies FPV drone operators. So this is the only job, to find enemies FPV drone operators. And for example, on this video we can see how the Russians were tracking Ukrainian Baba Yaga drone. They were following him to the line, to the area to the final evacuation zone where the Ukrainian FPV drones basically took the drones from the ground. The Russians sent this information to artillery forces, and after that they destroyed the entire block, probably with the very powerful missiles. And this is a very important thing why I'm telling you this, because on the 17th of December we got almost the same video from the area of the village by the name of Kalinovka. We saw the same story. The Russians on this area have a very powerful reconnaissance team whose main purpose is to track and to discover the Ukrainian FPV drone operators. We see the same story. FPV drone operator Baba Yaga that was discovered by the Russians. Then the Russians followed this drone to the evacuation zone, and after that another base of FPV drone operators was destroyed. So this is the current situation, and this is very interesting. Now we are moving further to the south. We have some updates about Klishchevka. According to information we have those days there was a meeting between Zelensky, Zaluzhny and Syrsky. They had the Ukrainian infantry army, and they were talking about the situation, and they took a decision to evacuate lots of cities. Zelensky doesn't want to evacuate. He doesn't want to step back. He forced the military part of Ukraine to hold the territory until the spring, and only to step step back in the spring, but Zaluzhny and Sersky agreed to leave the cities like Avdiivka, Kurakhova, Klishchevka, and Toretsk. I can't tell you whether this piece of information is true or not, because I don't understand the reason to step back from Toretsk. There are no clashes for this territory. I don't understand any reasons to step back from Kurakhova, because the front line is very far. Maybe the Ukrainians don't have like the second or third defense belt at some point, and it's going to be like the only possible solution them how to save army. I don't know. Now we're moving to Avdiivka area. We have lots of updates, and once again, according to information we have, the Ukrainians have already started evacuation of their personnel, military officers, headquarters, hospitals, evacuation points to the line of Selidova, Novogrudovka, and the Pokrovsk. So they're getting as far as possible from the main combat line. Furthermore, we got update that currently the Ukrainians, according to the Russian forces, Russian intelligence, currently we see significant number of trucks, military trucks, that are heading inside of Avdiivka. And the Russians are saying that these are trucks the Ukrainians are planning to use for evacuation. They are not bringing the personnel, they are not bringing ammo. There are some ammo, some food, maybe medicine, maybe something else, but the main purpose of this significant number of trucks is to evacuate as many as possible Ukrainian soldiers inside of Avdiivka. So we'll see whether it's true or not, or just speculation or something like this, because you know that there is like interesting. They say that if you want to find no, not like this. The strength of defense belt can be measured as the strength of the weakest point in defense belt. I hope you know what I'm saying. So we can use the same words to say the possibility of withdrawing positions from this or this sector can be measured by, let's say, withdrawing positions on the farthest point of the front line. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say when talking about the real example. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians are planning to step back from Avdiivka, but there is one point, and I'm talking about ex-aviation base that located on the farthest point of Ukrainian defense belt in this area, and we still see that Ukrainians save control over this territory, and they're not going to step back. The Russians almost every single day, every single week publish more and more videos how they bomb this territory, but the Ukrainians are still there. So, for example, when talking about this example, I can't say that Ukrainians are planning to step back, because the farthest point still under the Ukrainians, and they're not doing like they're not withdrawing their positions. So, very interesting situation. Maybe the Russians are trying to hesitate the Ukrainians to break their minds, and maybe to make some panic among them, to some speculations about the possible evacuation and so on. Anyway, we'll see. When talking about the common situation, the clashes continues on the south. The Russians managed to capture lots of soldiers, Ukrainians, to complete the clearing of Vinogradniki area. The Russians continue clashes in Berdichi, Stepova, but without any progress for the previous for this weekend. We still haven't received any updates about any progress from either from the Russian or from the Ukrainian side. And now we are moving to the south Donetsk direction, and we have lots of updates from this territory. Once again, the Ukrainians, according to some sources, are planning to leave Kurakhova as well. I don't know what to say about this. When talking about Novomikhailivka, we received very interesting video. If you remember, during the previous days, we were talking a lot about the collapse of Zverinets fortification, but we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that. And the first military expert that reported about the fall of Zverinets was Rybar. And just today, a few days later, we got some videos from this area published by the Ukrainian 79th Air Mobile Brigade. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians were bombing with FPV drones another Russian armored fist who was heading from Marinka to Zverinets. Of course, this video was published by the Ukrainians, so that's why we will not see like significant Russian victory or something like this, just FPV drone bombardments. But this video we can use as some evidence that something happened there. because this icon shows the let's say the geolocation of the maximum progress during that video. Maybe the Russians managed to move further and to encircle this area, but we don't know because we don't have the like video geolocations and so on. The only thing we know that there was an attack, and maybe that attack was successful because the sources reported about the progress. Furthermore, the Ukrainians during that video haven't shown us even a single tank that was destroyed, and if the Ukrainians showed the video where there are no destroyed tanks, that means that the situation was very difficult for them. So we have something, but for now still we haven't received geolocations inside of Zveriny, so we will keep the situation as is. And furthermore, about this territory, the situation, we got another very interesting video. Yes, I forgot. So the Ukrainian Leaper got stuck in the Ukrainian mood. As you can see, the situation is very difficult for Western weapon. The Ukrainians and the Western countries wasn't prepared for such a conditions of war. They got used to, let's say, European like weather, maybe to African weather, maybe from Afghanistan, maybe from Syria. They got used to this weather, but the Western weapon completely can't survive during the regular Ukrainian routine. So this is the situation, and this is the reason also, and a reason why the Ukrainians were defeated and have problems, were defeated during the autumn and have problems right now during the winter military campaign. Now we are moving to the South Donetsk direction, and we have some Zaporozhye area, my bad. We have some updates from this territory as well. Somewhere in Zaporozhye also the sources published, not the warehouse, but this is probably service center, and there are a lot of significant number of evacuated and destroyed Western weapon, mainly Bradleys. Most of them were evacuated, and the Ukrainians are using them as a parts, as a donors for those Bradleys that they still Ukrainians can use on the combat line. But anyway, in this video we see significant number of destroyed Western weapons that Ukrainians managed to evacuate. To tell the truth, we know that like maybe 3 times more they haven't managed to evacuate, and they're lying somewhere in Bradley Square or something like this. Anyway, the situation develops not very good in this area as well. There were no heavy clashes during the previous 24 hours, just a regular military routine. The Russians attacked the Ukrainians with FPV drones on the south of Robotyne. The Ukrainians attacked the Russians with FPV drones, so just regular things. No updates about any progress in this and that direction. Now we are moving to Kherson area. We have a lot of updates. As you can see, according to this, during the previous 24 hours, there were a lot of FPV drone strikes against the Russian forces in this area. And this is very interesting why the Ukrainians have intensified their activity. There are few reasons of that. First of all, maybe the Ukrainians just want to help their forces on the ground to survive or to complete evacuation. Or maybe the Ukrainians are planning to send more forces from one side, but from another side. I don't think that Ukrainians probably want to continue this offensive operation due to heavy losses. Anyway, another interesting update from this territory is that according to some Russians and the Ukrainians, the Russians stopped using aviation bombs FAB 500 and FAB 1500 after 3 Su-34 were shot down in this area. It's information according at least the Ukrainian sources. Other Russian sources are saying that that was a fake and speculation, because the Russians continue publishing more and more videos with FAB 500, but as I understand, this is the only video that was published for the previous 24 hours. As I understand, this is not a new video, this is old one, and this is very interesting note about the stop usage of Su-34 in this direction. I really expect to get more videos, fresh videos, and then we're going to receive an answer whether the Russians continue bombardments or they took a decision to take a small operational pause to discover the reasons why those 3 Su-34 was shut down, and they need to secure this area before continuing. For example, the Russians also reported that during the previous days, if you remember, there was attack against Starokonstantinov. The same day we got report that first F-16s arrived on the territory of Ukraine. The Russians published update that there were bombardments and missile strikes in Starokonstantinov. And today we got details about that attack. The Russians, as a result of those strikes, managed to destroy the Nasam's air defense system and Krotalin LNG of the French production. Furthermore, at the end of the video, I would like to mention and to note your attention that we have updates about the military situation, about the strikes, but now we also discussed the mobilization process in Ukraine. And during the previous 24 hours, we got significant number of videos of this mobilization process. We have already discussed the process in Chernivtsi, the city in the western part of Ukraine. This young man managed to escape and to avoid the mobilization process, but as you can see, military personnel, Ukrainian works through the cities, along the streets with rifles, and they're basically kidnapping people on the streets. Then we got update from Dnipro, where the significant number of Ukrainian military guys entered the residential area and were basically capturing anyone they met on the streets. Later, we got updates about the creation of the roadblocks on the 28th of December, and everybody will be stopped, and there are very high chances that anyone can get to the combat line and to become a Leopard driver. And right before I start making this video, we got another video somewhere from the marketplace in Ukraine, another personnel of TCK walking somewhere in the market, and they were talking with the only man on this scene. As you can see, just women. Take a look at this picture. There are lots of people. For the entire video, there were just 2 men in this area, most of the women, and that's it. So basically, we're at the situation when the Ukrainian men are just afraid of leaving their houses, and they're sitting at home, trying to not to risk their lives and not to get on the streets. So the act of democracy, we're getting more and more acts of democracy every single day, and probably as soon as the Ukrainians will adopt the main mobilization law, we're gonna receive significant number of videos of such type. And that's it for today. Military Summer Channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.